Hello, welcome everybody to our HR Huddle this afternoon on March 15th. I'm so glad, Renee, for you to join me today while Jen is enjoying some time in Palm Springs. So thanks for joining me.
You're welcome. I wish I was in Palm Springs too. I wish I was somewhere warmer, Tamera, but here we are.
Me too, since winter showed up after our little spring fling we had for a couple weeks. I know you did too. And we also know, it's March 15th and our HR friends are probably trying to support all the client service professionals in the deadlines today, especially on the tax side. But I know there's other, deadlines, happening. And we thought, one of the things we've been grappling with is, capacity. And we've talked about some different capacity topics before in the HR huddles. And we thought today we would spend a little bit of time talking about some HR recruiting strategies, specifically around experienced hire recruiting, and how to really have an ongoing engine, or what we call all the time recruiting. That we should just have perpetual recruiting happening. And Renee and I have been doing some projects with some different firms, and we've been working with some HR leaders on their organization function, the HR function itself. And we know that recruiting is a place that we can continue to beef up and reduce some of those peaks and valleys, I think, that we see in recruiting, and have it be continuous recruiting. And so I think that's one of the things that we wanted to start with, and maybe start with a little bit of philosophy. So I don't know, Renee, if there's anything you want to add, from a setup perspective to get us started here.
Tamera, I think you had a good lead in there with year round. You called it continuous recruiting. And that's just not really historically what we've done, especially with, I guess campus recruiting has its rhythms. We do it a couple of times a year, but experienced hire recruiting, we want to be out there and ready for candidates when they show up. We don't want to have, like we lose a couple of people on April 16th, sorry if that's where it goes. But if we have those losses, then we fire up those engines right after April 15th. And we get in there and we do some recruiting for a while, and then we get busy again with clients, or we take summer breaks and the recruiting gets put down for a couple of months. And then we lose some people during the summer and we go, oh no, let's fire it back up again. And so it's that start, stop, it's that pick up and put it back down that we think is detrimental. And so we really want to have that recruiting engine just firing year round. And when those candidates show up, we're ready to talk to them. And unfortunately, that means we have to talk to them when it's not convenient to us. We have to set aside the client work, or we have to push other things aside so that we can do that. We also have to have a recruiting owner. I think that's what's often missing too, is that we don't have one person who is driving that forward, and probably not somebody who's client facing, unless they are going to reduce their role so that they have enough time and energy to put into that whole experienced hire recruiting effort. So I think that's a big one, year-round recruiting with a recruiting owner. That's a big philosophy change for firms.
Well, and gosh, I'm sitting there listening. Where do you start? Do we start with capacity requirements? Do we start what are the skill sets of the recruiter? So I'm just going to jump in because there's like several places we could go in this. And so we'll just kind of, see how it unfolds or unravels. But as you're talking about that recruiter, one of the things to think about is the balance between knowing the profession, so knowing the technical side of it and the kinds of skills we need. And then also how I describe a recruiter is it's a sales and marketing role. And, yes, sales and marketing can support us with some of our initiatives, by the way, to getting, job advertisements out there, our positioning on our website and all of that. So there is that marketing piece of it. But also from a skill, perspective, it really is networking, referral relationships, with recruiters and other, sources, if it's campus, it's, the career center, folks, professors, that kind of networking and referral sources, but then also the qualification of candidates, which is a sales process, and, understanding the need and the desire, and comp, which is budget, how they're going to fit culturally, timing, how do we best facilitate that? And then the collaboration inside the firm, for the partners and, managers, et cetera, that are going to be working with that individual. And how do we go through that qualification, spot? So as you think about like what kind of person, should be facilitating this kind of role, that's something to think about, that maybe often we don't define it that way.
Yeah, well, and also remember, Tamara, if we were building it out, we would have a roles grid, and the recruiter would not, or the person who owned recruiting wouldn't have their name in all of those boxes. So if they're really strong on that sales and marketing side of the equation and the people side of the equation, they might not be as strong on the scheduling, logistics, details side of it. Yep. We would need someone else to kind of flesh that out. And then if they're really strong on the client-facing side, like they really understand how the business works and what are the type of people that we're looking for, maybe they even came from the client service side, because you and I have met recruiters before who grew up in audit or grew up in tax and at some point said, I've like dipped my toe in recruiting and I want to do more. And so they end up in that recruiting chair. They don't, but the thing is, they don't have the HR background. They don't have all that technical knowledge. They didn't do classes on screening and, understanding all the legal issues around recruiting. And so we're going to have to build their skill set or have someone there to be their support on that side of it. So depending on the person that you have, you're going to have to kind of build out a structure that supports them. And, so yes, I mean, it is hard to figure out like what's the perfect person, what's the right person. It probably depends on what you already have in place, kind of assessing that and seeing where are our gaps right now. And for a lot of firms, I think the gap today is who's driving it forward, who's owning it and making sure it's happening and going out there and performing the activities or rallying the resources to perform those activities.
Yep. Well, and I think maybe this is a little bit different direction, but I think one of the things to define, as the owner of recruiting is what does our capacity plan call for? And I think we do some of that. Like I might do that in the tax department. I might do that in audit, but often we're not looking at like by skill level. And if I'm looking at growth and I'm looking at promotions, what kind of roles are we going to be needing? And if I factor in 15% turnover, I think that's about our average we're factoring in, probably more if you're larger. We're going to have some normal attrition and, turnover. And then I got to factor in growth. So I have to do replacement and growth. What kind of positions do I need and what are the levels of those positions? And start to project that so that we can start to say, what do we need? And if I'm looking at growing, that's where this continuous or, year round, and, Renee, you said, I might need to stop if I have somebody, they're moving back to my area or they applied for a position that I might need to stop and say, hey, we could use this skill. Could we go out and develop the business? Could we expand client relationships if we hire this person? And most of the time, the answer is yes. But we're not often, hiring or recruiting from that perspective. We're doing it based on I have an immediate need right now versus, future projections.
Oh my gosh, I love where you are, Tamara. And that's the difference between, reactive is the normal way. It's like, we have a hole. Let's go see how we can plug it. And it's sort of like recruiting in desperation or something. I'll just take a body. I just need someone to fill the hole. Versus where you are, which is this more proactive approach that we're thinking ahead of where are our holes going to be. And we know we're going to create some. Every year, we're going to have some turnover. We're going to have some people move. We're going to have people moving up, which creates issues. And then we have old holes, by the way. Most firms lost some seniors over the last few years or maybe lost a manager or two, and we haven't ever been able to fill that. And so we feel like, yes, if you can do that kind of planning and thinking about what you need, and then there's some strategies that really work. If you have the capacity to go out and work on those strategies, you could fill those holes. But the planning, yeah, sure, that comes first. And then you said something else, Tamara. You're talking about hiring ahead.
Yes.
And that's another philosophy, which is I'm not going to wait until I have a missing spot, but I might take somebody even when I don't need someone because they are so great, because they could maybe fill a hole or maybe they would create capacity that we could sell into. And maybe then we could let go of some of these people that don't fit that well, or, and which we haven't had, I think, the comfort level or that we could recruit successfully. So we're just hanging on to bodies in some cases. And so you were in proactive land, hire ahead land. I really love.
Well, and it does let you be more strategic about it. And like you said, I can top grade, my talent and I can elevate people. I can also start to figure out what my pipeline, of high potentials are and, future managers, senior managers, partners. And, it's not going to be perfect, but at least we can start to see, where are the pockets, where are the gaps, how do we continue to further that? It helps us, by the way, we're talking about recruiting, but it also helps us on a development and career pathing perspective to do that, to have clarity about that. Where are we and where are people and how do we anticipate their progression and, talking to them about it. So it helps from that perspective too. But then I can say, where do I need to recruit, to fill in those gaps from that proactivity perspective.
Well, and succession planning, Tamera, that's the other thing is that we have people 5, 7, I mean, maybe sooner, but, in an ideal situation, 5, 7, 10 years from now, who are going to be moving out of the organization. And so how are we looking ahead at who's going to step in and take their place? Or, by the way, set up some sort of new area of business for us, whether that's adding on client accounting or adding on a new niche. There's opportunity in finding these talented people who are out there,
right?
And making the room for them to come in and really lead us,
right? And if you think about the role, I just want to say for a moment, if you think about the role, if I'm maybe a smaller, to mid-size, growing to be mid-size firm, I'm probably going to have when I hire a recruiter. First of all, it probably lives under just general HR to start, and then we're like, we need a recruiter. And it probably is going to be a combination of experienced hire and, campus recruiting. And then as we start to grow, we should split those out. It's, a different skill set, a different market, if you will, target who we're going after. Like you said, there's more of a cycle on the campus recruiting. There's more of a rhythm than the experienced hire recruiting, which is more of that networking, referral relationships and developing that. So as you think about progressing, depending on where you are, your size, what your size is and your growth, and also just what do you have currently in our HR function? That's something to think about as you think about, well, what kind of role do I hire? Where do I start? Just to kind of paint that picture too.
Sure. And you might be able to take somebody already in the organization. Like if you've got an HR generalist with an interest in experienced hire recruiting, perhaps most HR departments don't have that much capacity. But if you did, we could probably teach someone the tactics and get them going on building out a committee and figuring out what are the tactics we want to pursue. And I wonder if we should talk about some of those, Tamera, because we're talking really like pie in the sky, maybe big picture. But what are some things that firms can do today to be looking for experienced hire talent?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Well, and one is the whole like our brand as a company. And I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about that, like our unique, special, and different, and how we illustrate that, like sort of broadcast that out into the recruiting marketplace.
Yeah, so unique, special, different, we call it your USD. So, what is your positioning and why should someone come work for your firm versus the firm down the street or the firm that I can find by Google? And so, what is it that's special, about you? And, making a list of what those strengths are, maybe even interviewing some people to say, what is special and why do you stay here? Why did you select here? Why did you stay here? It's a great re-recruiting activity, by the way, because then they're like, oh yeah, this is what I like about our firm. And then you could get some testimonials and some quotes. I've seen some really great quotes and videos on firms' websites. A day in the life of, an intern or a staff accountant or a manager or a partner by department, speak to that a little bit so you can tell the story. What does it look like? I think this overlaps into culture also. And so as we look at, really being intentional about defining the kind of culture we're committed to in our firm, how does that play out with our talent and how are they living it? And so if you say like it's a family, atmosphere, what are we doing to support each other, through this pandemic that we've been doing, or for social and fun things or celebrations or, times of need? What are we doing, from a culture perspective as far as, learning and development and growth? What are we doing from a feedback perspective? How do I get feedback and how do we work on feedback and respond to feedback? So if you could look culturally also, then you can start to, identify it. And then you can put that in a whole bunch of other places besides a website. You could use social media. You can, look at, if you have a Facebook or Instagram, account, how do we foster that? How do we have that live out then in our recruiting activities? How we're being, transaction with people. So I think that's important too.
Yes, that's great, Tamara. And once we have that defined, you're right, then we can just get it in all the different spots. And then let's get everybody in the firm connected to each other on social media. Let's get connected to people in our community. So that means clients, prospects, people, if I'm from the community, people I went to college with, as many people as possible. We would love to see firms really undergoing an effort to get as many people as possible on social media, because then when we're pushing out these, we're looking for an audit manager with this particular expertise, we can have our whole firm network push that out there and garner more attention. And then also maybe somebody knows somebody, because that's a really big tactic of experienced hire recruiting is targeting. That we say, this is, we get really specific about what we're looking for. And then we look out in our network and see, is anybody connected to someone like that? And you never know who that's going to be. That could be the receptionist. It could be the audit service line leader. It could be a staff in audit whose aunt is an audit manager. I mean, you just don't really know where those connections come from. So if we're all connected with each other out there on LinkedIn, we can start to see that kind of web. And who do we know collectively as a group?
Well, you might say, so two things. One, we get asked, why do we need to connect to everybody in our firm? We already know everybody. And what you just described is the why. So if you get asked that, we can say, this is why we want to be able to do that. And then the second piece is empowering your people to do what we would call a friends and family campaign and share open positions, in LinkedIn, post it on their page and newsfeed, share it, in other, forums, sometimes, Facebook, whatever it might be. Do an email, do an old-fashioned email. I know that's like old-fashioned today, but I could do an old-fashioned email.
It's as old-fashioned as a phone call, Tamara.
Right? I know. So, anything, 2019 early is old-fashioned now. But we could do an email campaign and, promote it, because you don't know. The other thing it does is it has people talking about it. As we're promoting it, we're in conversation, and then we'll raise it to other people. It'll be more top of mind. But you just don't know, where those connections are going to come in. So I think that's really important, to get the tools, get the communication, empower people to be able to promote it, not just in the corporate places that we might promote it. And referral bonus. So that leaves me.
Oh, exactly. I was going to say the same thing. And it's got to be something significant. If you think about, if I'm going to get out my Rolodex or look at my LinkedIn community to say who might be a fit for this, I'm probably not going to put myself on the line like that for $1,000, $2,000. It needs to be larger amounts. And especially for these difficult to find roles like manager, even seniors. Seniors are like the holy grail, the needle in a haystack of experienced hires. So, I think we're talking about, 5 digits, which sometimes when we say that, everybody goes, like they're shocked or something. But some firms are getting it, and they've got those kinds of referral bonuses in place, and that's where they're getting their experienced hires. They're showing up through the employee network.
Well, if you think about what you're going to pay a recruiter, if I pay $10,000 to $15,000 to an employee, and you can pay it over time, I could pay it into, chunks, like they have to be here for 6 months or whatever. But if you do that, it's going to be less. Also, there's going to be that cultural element, because I want to work with people that are like me. So if there's somebody that is a good high potential person that I'm inviting Renee in to come meet with because we have an opening, I think that's important to think about. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think those candidates do, and in my experience, what I hear from people, they stay longer. People who we know or someone knew and brought them in, we have more success with those than with an external recruiter.
Right. Exactly. Well, so in speaking of the recruiter, the other thing you could have, been thinking about as we were talking about like social media and targeted accounts, we might go, or we might have people in our firm go, I don't want to go poach people. Like that's an old fashioned word too, but, I want to, I don't want to go, we have some respect with some of our competition, and we want to honor that. We want to value that. But, if we're not willing to go do searches on social media, we're not willing to go invite people, we're not willing to do the friends and family, we're going to be limited. And the recruiters you're paying, that's exactly what they're going to be doing. And we have the closer connections, we have the warm ways in. And so if we could, do some of those searches, see who's connected, see who might be, invited, that is the right fit, or who they know, ask, who do you know? We're going to, create those connections. And I think we'll have more success doing it. Or we could pay a recruiter to do it, but that's what they're going to go do. So it's, it's kind of silly to argue that, because that's already happening. So and we want to respect some of those relationships too, and honor some of those. I do want to acknowledge that. So I understand that, but to say we're not doing it ever is probably not valid. And so we want to be strategic and targeted about that.
Yeah, and you talked about the warm way in, so it's probably not, someone just dialing phone numbers and calling people,
Right.
cold calling people. That's what recruiters do. But I think our method would look more like, I see you at CPE on a regular basis. And when I see you and you say, how are things at work? I say, look, our firm is growing. Things are great. We're looking for experienced people. Maybe I don't know if I would say it like that, but I definitely would talk positively about my firm and all the great things happening there. I would want to be an attractant, just like that brand you talked about, Tamera. Individual people out in the community need to be an attractant for, wow, it seems like a cool place to work. Maybe when I'm unhappy, I might think about applying for a job there.
Yep, exactly. And that's a good point too, like alumni, who else do we know and who do they know? Like staying in contact with people that used to work at our firm, and we would have a list. They're hireable, they're rehirable, they're not rehirable. Stay in touch with the rehirable people, like man-to-man defense, or woman-to-woman defense. Renee, you have these people you're staying in contact with. Tamera, you have these folks, but also they're in our communications. We're telling them, they're in our friends and family email. We're looking, to grow, and we have these open positions. If you know anybody, or are you interested? Are you happy? How are you doing there? And if so, great. If not, and you know somebody, we would love for you to get the word out, just in your network. So that's another really important strategy. And again, we have to say who owns that strategy, because often it's like, that's a good idea, and maybe we do it in pockets, or there's a couple of people we stay in touch with, but I don't actually have a pipeline of who those people are, and we haven't categorized them that way. So.
Yes, right. And let's be sure to stay in touch with the people who applied for our firm, or we went out and interviewed and they declined us. Great candidates on campus that said, hey, I'm going to go Big Four, I'm going to move to the big city. They may be sick of that 5 years later, and that would be a great person to have on our alumni list, that we just stay in touch with them. Who knows if they want to come back home? Yep. When they do, we want them to think of us.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I think we could continue. Renee, is there anything else to say to wrap up here? We are way at time.
No, just don't be hopeless. Be hopeful about this. There are strategies that work, and we have articles on it. We have information on our blog. If you search for recruiting, you will find those articles, or you can reach out to us, because there's no need to feel hopeless about it. You can find people. It's just using the right strategies.
Yes. So let us know if you have any questions or thoughts or requests on this. And then as you think about future topics, we always welcome those as for future HR huddles. And it was great to be with you today. We hope you have a wonderful, productive week, and we will see you next week.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Tamera.